open for the questions.
Thanks, Michelle, for running that game. After that, and some of you might be able to answer your own questions that you submitted, and some of the questions had sort of a similar theme to them, so if you would like to get a really quick answer to your question, don't tune out right away. Pay attention to the next couple of questions, and we'll build on some of that information that we talked about. So there will be some that are reviewed for you at this point, and then we'll get into some details of why to those questions. So the first question was,
And if you're in the room, and this is questions here, oh, we don't have the clicker. Should we have a clicker? Or we'll just let the back of you did such an amazing job with the clicker game, we may just let you, all right, so Adam's got a clicker now. Is Carl in the room? All right, Carl, you're the first question we're taking. Oh, no, not Carl, okay.
so this question about when you go to store your car, when is the best time for an oil change? And as we learned from the game, it's right before you put your car away for the winter. The reason why is because if you're driven it over the summer, you have some fuel, some water, some combustion byproducts that we in the oil. You don't want to let those sit in your engine for 5, 6, 7 months during cold winter. You want to put the car away with a fresh, clean oil jar in it that we can start it out with spray, it's ready to go. So the next question. Next question was about oil change being recommended yearly, even if you put a low number of miles on your car, and then how to dispose of low mileage oil. So used oil, try to recycle. A lot of your local auto parts stores and mechanics will recycle your used oil. But if you don't change your oil at least once a year, you can start to get the formation of sludge and deposits just from having that oil exposed to air. So think about it as tied to the product shelf of our recommendations. When it's sealed, 5 years, no problem. But once it's open, you're exposed to oxygen, you will moisture from the air, you get the temperature cycles that it's going to experience. You can start to break down the oil chemically. So whether it's sitting in your engine or in the bottle, that's really where that 1 year recommendation comes from, independent of mileage.
You see your name pop up, so like we have 2 people ask us breaking oil questions. John or David, if you're in the room, just throw your hand up and we'll make sure you get your hat.
2 questions about brake oil, and I'm going to give you 2 different answers. So if your owner's manual does call for a brake oil change after 500 or 1,000 miles, definitely good to follow that. If it doesn't, it means that the engineering team has done a lot of work to validate that that's no longer necessary. Now that that's the official answer, what I'll tell you is you have a marvelous piece of engineering with your Corvette. Every new car that I get or recommend anybody to do, I will still do a brake oil change. It's very low cost insurance. There's such a significant investment, so there's nothing wrong with doing a brake oil change after 500,000 miles. If it makes you more comfortable, please continue to do it. If your owner's making calls for it, definitely do it. But if you're not moved to and your owner's making doesn't demand it, it is no longer required for certain vehicles. Outside of the Corvette, let's go into the GM family, low mileage Camaro. When you base your oil change on number of miles or months since last oil change, and it is in that case going to be very low mileage, so you're going against that 12-month recommendation. So if it's a seasonal drive, or before you put away for the winter, otherwise just change that same month every year. Maybe we have over the vehicle service.
Is Carolyn in the room? You can see up in the front.
So a low mileage Corvette, about 200 miles a year, how often should you change the oil? I think everybody here knows the answer to that question now. But how often do you change the filter? And do things break down if they're not circulated regularly? To start with the last part of that question, it is just good for your vehicle, for the seals, for your oil system, to circulate the oil every few months. Instead of letting it sit off for 11 months a year, putting all 200 miles on in just one nice trip in the summer. Letting your car start and idle for a little while every few months is definitely not a bad idea. Changing the filter every time you change the oil is still recommended. So as that oil ages just in ambient conditions, anything that's in the filter that's taking out into the oil, or anything that's breaking out in the oil that's starting to plug the filter, you need to change the filter not eager to push really high mileage oil drains for this type of application. So there isn't a benefit, if you will, to trying to get a 20,000 mile Corvette oil drain, because you want to be changing the oil more frequently and really having that fresh oil type performance every mile you go on your engine. Okay, another question from Nick about oil life monitors. So historically, oil life monitors or even just the dashboard oil change indicators, sometimes you should just see mileage or time based. In modern vehicles, oil life monitors take into account driving conditions, idle time, how many miles you put on the car, time since last oil change, and are a very good indicator of when you should change your oil. That being said, it's not the only thing I would trust, but I would never ignore it. Combine this with what we've talked about so far with a 12-month oil drain. If your oil life monitor comes on before that 12 months, it's time to change your oil. If you make it to 1 year, even if your oil life monitor doesn't come on, it's a good idea to go for an oil change at that time. Okay, let's go back in time a little bit. So C2s and C3s, these are older Corvettes. This is pre that 1993 that Michelle had at the beginning. What are the best mobile products for those cars? So we have Mobile One 15W50 for older Corvettes, older in this case being C2, C3. We also have a new product available called Mobile One Classic Car. It's a 10W30 right now. That can also be a good fit for some older engines. 1962 Corvette. What is the best Mobile One engine oil that's used in this older engine? So this still fits in that same range of having 15W50 as a recommendation. And I think we're going to get to walk in the later question. Yeah. I think this is the last 80s and before question. So 81 Corvette, it's hard to find conventional oil. Which Mobile One synthetic oil should be used and why? This is the third time you're going to hear Mobile One 15W50. The reason is for those older engine architectures, you need additional zinc to protect the valve train. So valve train design changed in the 1980s, and oil design requirements changed with it. For older engines, we want that higher zinc product, 15W50 mockers. Okay, C4, the LT5 engine, Apple's factory built. What's the best current Mobile One oil for this engine? If you're paying attention during the game, everything from 1993 forward has been tested to be backwards compatible with Mobile One Supercar. So Mobile One Supercar 040 is our current recommendation for this engine. In the original factory build was 5W30, and then a different oil if you want to run on the track. And in order to simplify things for the consumer, we worked with GM to develop 0W40 Supercar, and then tested on every generation of engine back to 1993 to make sure that it was suitable for everything LT5 and newer up until we introduced the 550 for a few products. One of those would be a 2024 Z06 that sees the track sometimes a year. What about the 5W50 makes it suitable for both street and track use? So one of the reasons when we had the two product recommendations for street and track is we had a lower viscosity, lower zinc product for street, higher viscosity with more zinc in it for the track. And that more zinc is supposed to be more valve train protection. But what it also brings with it is phosphorus, which can damage catalytic converters and affect your emissions, your fuel economy, things like that. So when we designed the 5W50, we Synthetic, conventional, and then you may have also seen synthetic blend are marketing terms that are trying to describe what's in the oil. But what makes an oil synthetic is that you're actually making or breaking bonds, doing chemistry on the composition of the oil. So there are 5 different base stock groups of oil. The first 2 are what we consider conventional. The next 3 would be considered synthetic. But what they all have in common is you are not making that product just by distillation, by separating it from something else. You're actually making it by doing whether that's polymerization or hydroprocessing, making molecules that weren't in that mixture to begin with. And that's what makes something a synthetic oil. So what's the difference between Mold 1, that's recommended for all your Corvettes, and other synthetic engine oils that you could use in place of Mold 1 products? And the difference is really the amount of testing that we do on your specific engines. So this is both DEXO's R specification testing that we'll touch on later, testing during development of the engine, after putting engine oil in when they're doing development of all the parts and things. So it's lots of development data on that product, and then it's performance on the track as the racing teams use those same products. So we have experience in the broadest range of operating conditions and the most hours and revs with Mold 1 and Corvette engines compared to other synthetics that might be the same viscosity grade.
Was Bill in the room? Didn't see anything go up. Oh, okay, perfect, gotcha.
Okay, purchase Mold 1 supercar for the C8 Corvette. A lot of other people in your Corvette club are using Mold 1, but maybe a different product name. What should you use and why? Also, what are dealers using for oil changes? So dealers should be using Mold 1 supercar. If you're bringing the Corvette to the dealer, they should be getting Mold 1 supercar. They should be still taking 1980s before Corvette to the dealership. 50 would be the answer, but probably doing those oil changes yourself with a private mechanic. The choice to use a different Mold 1 product might come from historical familiarity. Like I said, for a while, 5W30 was recommended, the 90s and early 2000s. But because of all of the testing with Supercar 0W40 to be backwards compatible to 1993, that's what we should be using, and that's what dealerships are all encouraged to use as well. An opinion question, okay. Growing opinion that lower viscosity oils being recommended by manufacturers, such as 0W20s, should be reverted back to higher viscosity oils, like 5W30 or 0W40. We'll do the second part of that question as well. But when you're designing an engine, when the engineering team is choosing bearing tolerances and clearance, things like that, oil passage sizes, they're doing that with a certain viscosity range in mind. So going up or down maybe one viscosity grade, like 0W20 or 0W30, most engines tolerate that big sort of change. But if you have an engine that's designed to run with a new low viscosity oil, like a 0W60 or 0W20, I would not recommend trying to go to a 15W50 just to get much more protection. You're changing the fluid dynamics that are happening in that engine too much. You really want to stick to the viscosity range that the engine was designed with. And then does that engine be turbocharged or having a hybrid system make a difference? So turbochargers changed oil formulations drastically about 10 years ago. But current industry specifications, along with OEM specifications like GM has, include tests for turbocharger deposits and low-speed pre-ignition, which can be induced by turbochargers. So most oils on the shelf in the modern certification are formulated to provide protection despite having a turbocharger. Another type of vehicle evolution that we're seeing is hybrids. So hybrids are also changing how engine oils are formulated. When you have a hybrid, you might have an extended amount of time that the engine is off. And then you So how does the formulation strategy differ between the LT2, the LT6, and the Turbo LT7? So one thing that may surprise folks is that the LT6 is actually a little easier on the valve train. So higher revs, things like that, but because of the geometry being dual overhead cam, you have much less distance travel, much less pressure in the valve train versus the older engine architecture. Imagine sitting on a NASCAR engine set to an LT6. That would be a really high demand for oil. But when you have both engine architectures and you design either 0W40 or the 5W50 for them, you're choosing additive levels, temperature operating ranges for that very specific set of parts. That's why we work so closely with Corvette to develop these oils. These aren't oils that we have on the shelf and we say, yeah, maybe this is good for Corvette. We're choosing all the elements in the composition to match the operating conditions that that specific engine is going to see. Similar question, so what factors lead to the Mobile 1 formulation use of C8? And that is, again, in cooperation with GM Engineering. So they do tons of modeling before they ever will actually put an engine together. They'll have decided what viscosity range they think they want the oil to be. The additive chemistry composition really falls to us to determine this. So that can be thousands of formulations that we model, maybe hundreds of formulations that we make in the lab to do small meter oil, whatever it is, do temperature testing or wear testing on. We'll choose the best features of all of those. We combine them into a early development candidate to send for engine development. And as we get feedback about wear and shear and deposits, we can tweak that formulation so that when the car is ready to release, and we have the best product available and release a new product with the 550 supercar that is suitable for that. All right, when formulating oil, how do you balance demand for fuel economy with long-term engine protection? So a thinner fluid is usually easier to pump. It causes less parasitic loss on the system. You would expect to have higher fuel economy. So, and as the demand for efficiency goes up, we see a shift to lower and lower viscosity oils. Thicker oil that has higher film thickness often is correlated with better engine protection. The comment I'll make here is that Corvettes are performance focused. We're developing the oils for not just cruising on the street, but for track use. And because we have to have a single oil for that, our emphasis is on durability. And that's aligned with something like Corvette racing, that endurance racing, being a balanced performance series, they don't capture an extra horsepower if we can capture the engine oil that we ask to include more weight or the power curve change. But they need durability, they need the engine to last. Our first, second, and third priority in designing for Corvette in particular is durability.
Adam, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second here. If you do not have a red ticket for today's raffle, could you please hold one finger in the air, keep that in the air until someone writes you a ticket. Thank you.
We'll do a couple more questions. We'll finish passing out tickets. This is a big time to have on you on time. But we're changing from 5W40 to 0W40 armed with C7 engine. In fact, it's the opposite. So we do not have a 5W40 supercar. So we want to have C7 should be able 540 product should be available for Corvette. So we want to change to